Hello, and welcome back to the Skift Travel Podcast. I am Seth Borkos, head of Skift Research. I'm doing the introduction today, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Sarah. Say hello, Sarah.
Seth.
And so I'm doing the introduction today because we're going to talk about a Skift research report, and not just any report, actually our biggest report of our year, the State of Travel 2024. It's a beast. It's 400 plus charts. It includes Skift research data, third-party data, lots and lots of trends, sectors, consumer insights. Pretty much we've tried to cover the entire gamut of anything you might want to know about the travel industry. This is a big report, and so we're going to actually break it down into a couple of sections. Today, we're going to talk about the state of travel, specifically as it pertains to the hotel and online travel industries. And for that, we're joined by two very special, very smart guests. We've got from my team, Pranavi Agarwal, senior research analyst, and we've got Sean O'Neill, our hospitality editor. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us, Seth. And Sarah.
Yeah, and Sarah, of course. Sarah's really the one hosting us all. So look, before we jump too far into this conversation, if you've been a longtime listener of the Travel Podcast, you're enjoying it, don't forget to like, subscribe, rate, follow. You know the drill. We want to get that feedback from you. And of course, if you have questions you want us to answer, you can reach us, email us at podcast@skift.com. So without too much further ado, let's jump.
I just have to ask, like Seth said, this thing is a beast. It's amazing. It's awesome. So I'm very curious for our listeners and our readers. I am just, mind blown. I want to know how you go about putting something like this together. How long did it take? Give our listeners a little bit of inside information into how the sausage is made for a report like this.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot of sausage being made. I mean, it starts honestly months in advance. What we do is this is kind of a recap report. What we're doing is looking at what we see as the big trends, and we're trying to cover as many different things as possible. So rather than have like a single narrative or a single through line like a typical report does, what we do is we're sort of collectors. We collect all of our favorite charts and ideas and images and graphics and research reports, both from ourselves, but also from third parties and many other other smart analysts and consultants out there. And we bring them together and then we divide it up by team. So we have different analysts who cover different areas. So, our analyst who's been on this show before, Robin, covers a lot of our sustainability. He obviously did that section. Pranavi did our hotels section. And so we have different sections and we structure it. We have different parts. We have like a big picture part, the economic landscape, the state of broad tourism. And we've got a trends section, consumer trends, business trends, AI trends. And then we've got sector by sector where we say what's happening in hotels, what's happening in airlines, what's happening in car rentals. And so, it's kind of you gotta eat it. You gotta go piece by piece. You gotta break it down into smaller pieces.
A little bit of divide and conquer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a huge effort, and from the entire team, right? I mean, the truth is, I don't actually do that much work on it. It's all the amazing analysts on the Skift research team that are doing the really hard work of pulling everything together.
So with that, why don't we get into it and ask Pranavi a couple of questions here?
Well, yeah, I mean, I want to ask actually, I guess maybe Pranavi and Sean both this question. I mean, we'll start with Pranavi, but like one of the big themes for the state of travel is that this is like their first non-pandemic year. Like it almost feels weird to compare 2024 to 2019 at this point. We had this huge headwind from the pandemic, and we had this huge tailwind from revenge travel, and now we're in many ways maybe mostly free of the pandemic. So I mean, I'm going to ask this to both of you. We'll start with Pranavi, but like when you look at hotels and online travel agencies specifically, what do you see as the most significant opportunities and challenges for these businesses in terms of maintaining their current growth trajectory? What do you think about that, Pranavi?
Yeah, like you said, it's an uncertain period because we have no way of kind of gauging. There's no recovery left, so it's not as straightforward as it has been to kind of model the outlook. But I guess the challenges really that I see comes from staying relevant. I think we've seen that post-pandemic, there's a lot more competition. There are new entrants. It's become a lot easier to price shop, find new players, and kind of the legacy players, they're finding it more difficult to maintain their market share. So I think staying relevant and listening to consumers and trying to understand how consumer behavior has changed, I think that is more important than it ever has been. And I think we have to see that those legacy players have to evolve their business models in order to stay relevant.
And Sean, can I ask you if you have any similar thoughts on where you see the challenges and opportunities today?
Yeah. First of all, I echo what Sarah said. Like, it's just the report is just incredible. And one of the things, it reminds me of those, Sarah, you remember the Mary Meeker kind of big internet dump?
Yes. Absolutely.
And it's just so valuable how, for me, my first instinct is I'm so siloed. I think in hotels because that's what I cover, and I think heavily about the major hotel groups like the Marriotts and Hiltons of the world. But what's great about this report is you really have to look at the whole perspective. Like, a lot of it is a bit of a shell game of where's the money going, the margin maybe moving around from online travel, maybe going from Google or from Expedia or Airbnb or into the hotel groups or the independents versus the branded. And so looking through the charts, I encourage everyone who's listening to this to really try to look beyond whatever maybe your segment you most care about. In terms of opportunities and challenges for the hotel sector, when I look through this, they've had great margin expansion. I think that's one thing that, Pranavi called out in her slide. The major hotel groups have seen double-digit growth in both top line and bottom line since 2019. And so that has, and they believe they have a continued opportunity for doing that. And one of the things is they have a supply-demand advantage. Last year, the amount of hotel supply only increased by about half a percentage point in the US, whereas the 30-year average is about 2.5% a year. So that means there's just not a lot of hotels coming online the way they ordinarily should, but you've got a lot of demand. You still have a lot of people wanting to stay and book. So that is going to help support hotel pricing for some time to come. But I would agree and echo with what Pranavi was saying about one of the challenges. It's a bit about the strategy and savvy of negotiating this time, especially if a recession does materialize in the next couple of years. Hotels have a habit when there is a recession to lean into some of the online travel agencies. And so the question is whether this time have they kicked that habit and will they sort of continue to drive direct bookings?
I actually wanted to ask you specifically about a possible recession. I mean, we're by the time this podcast airs, we still will not have heard from Jerome Powell. He's speaking on Friday, and the market, everybody is really watching to see if there will be another rate cut. We've kind of been in this extremely volatile 2-week period, I suppose, post earnings, where we've had all sorts of economic indicators kind of come and go, and spikes and fluctuations in the market. One day, recession is coming. The next day, well, maybe not so much. And so I think a lot of people are watching to see what Jerome Powell has to say from his, fly fishing excursion on Friday, and that's going to give us a little bit more indication of what's coming in the next. I don't know, in the near term anyway. But I'm curious, like, how you think travel companies should prepare for this possibility. I mean, right now we're in a weird time. Even if we're post pandemic, this is a strange time to be operating a business. So I'm curious what strategies both of you think hotels and OTAs can use to either weather a potential recession, if that does come to pass, or to really, jump on what might be another period of growth going into the next couple of years, especially with the political landscape changing. All sorts of things are so in flux. How can companies really take advantage of this period of uncertainty?
I think it's important to remember that though travel is still inherently a luxury item, it's still a discretionary item. And I think if there is a recession, travel will be hit. And we're already seeing that. I mean, look at the latest Q2 earnings. I think nearly every company, Hilton, Marriott, Expedia, Airbnb, they all said that they're seeing a softening in demand. They're seeing softening leisure growth, normalizing leisure growth in particular into Q3. So we are seeing that softening coming through definitely. I think fundamentally, if there's a recession, pricing is going to become more important than ever. Especially consumers. I think consumers will want value for money. I think that's really important. And it's not just cheap prices. I think it's also good service for at the correct price point. And as I said earlier, I think we're seeing that consumers are price shopping a lot more. So you need to differentiate in some way. And it can't just be cheap prices. It has to be some level of experiential travel, some kind of loyalty discount, something different that your competitors aren't providing in order to differentiate yourself.
Do you think that the post-pandemic, like we've talked a lot about, revenge travel and about how, consumers are really saying, I don't care what's going on with inflation. I don't care what's going on. Like the rest of the world be damned. I am traveling because I remember the pandemic and I want to get out there and see the world. If we do have some economic hardship in people's lives, I want to kind of dig a little bit deeper into what you just said, Pranavi. Do you think that there will still be that travel, but it is going to be just a little bit different, where maybe in recessions past, it's like, okay, this part of my budget, we're going to just stop doing it. But now it may look a little different. Like the calculation for travelers might have a bit of a change as to what's important and what they're willing to do now versus in decades before the pandemic.
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to see some trading down. I think there was some threat of trading down like maybe a year ago, but I think we're seeing that coming in now. I think luxury will be protected. If you're already shopping in the luxury bucket, you don't care about a recession. You're still going to continue shopping for those luxury trips. But if you're in the chain scale down or 2 chain scales down, you might see trading down to more mid-scale. And I think we're seeing that in the data that mid-scale is doing really, really well because we are seeing that trading down, whilst economy not so well because those people who are really struggling, and even though they would really love to travel but can't, those kind of hotels are struggling. So mid-scale is really coming out as the winner here.
Are you seeing the same, Sean?
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, Skift did a report earlier this year about the wealth gap that's emerging, and so the companies that are catering to people in like the upper quarter of income are they're feeling still very good about their finances overall, and so they're continuing to spend, and they are not trading down. To Pranavi's point, and so I guess if we did enter into recession, while it's discretionary spending, I think people who are well off, if you have a product that lends itself to sort of premium and luxury, I think you should try to hold the line on pricing. That would be my advice to the companies. Try to keep your pricing power on rate because there is some sign now. The executives, they speak about this anecdotally, the hotel group executives, but the ones that do have premium and luxury products, they claim they don't see so much cutting back, that there has been a change. To your point, Sarah, over the past 5 years, there is some ring fencing of travel as still today, even though we are coming out of the pandemic sometime. There's been a reevaluation that travel is just very important to people. And so for the people who have the disposable, who are in the premium or luxury, they're willing to sort of protect that. Maybe they'll cut back on some other spending instead in their discretionary budget.
So one of the things that I think we've seen is to your exact point, Sean, that out of all of the chain scales, luxury has probably done the best job maintaining its pricing power. Pranavi was just calling out some trading down towards mid-scale, whereas economy is so low that it just drops off entirely. That leaves this question of what happens in the upscale and upper upscale. I gotta love the way that these chain scales are named, upscale and upper upscale. That was traditionally the reserve of the business travel, right? The upper upscale and upscale hotel. That was the classic quintessential consultant hotel. I mean, Sean, you actually just did a feature on like the state of the corporate travel and the business travel. We've been talking a lot about the leisure traveler and what happens in a recession. I've heard that, I've had people tell me that business travel is actually in many cases the earliest leading indicator of recession. What are your thoughts on business travel when it comes to hotels?
Yeah. So for the corporate and the consultants, they're broadly speaking not back to where they were at 2019 levels. And yes, business travel in general tends to be the canary in the coal mine about a recession, because an easy thing for businesses to cut back on when they're uncertain about what's going to happen in the future is to cut back on the travel and expenses. But the good news is that the major hotel groups in the most recent earnings, when they're looking at their forward bookings for the fourth quarter of this year, they say they've seen no slowdown. That in business travel in particular, both whether you break it out in small and medium-sized businesses, or you're talking about the large corporates or group conventions and businesses, everything they said it is continuing to show a compounded growth for the major hotel groups. So that gives me some optimism. We are in this weird time where it's hard to evaluate the data. I mean, this week they say they had to revise. It turns out there were 600,000 fewer jobs created in the U.S. than they thought. Like the biggest miscalculation in 15 years. Like it's very hard for the Jerome Powells to know, and the Christmas Setties at Hilton's to know how to predict when the data is so variable. But I think right now the hotel executives continue to be optimistic.
So like maybe the canary, maybe not. Well, the canaries don't sing. I guess they do something else. But like I think maybe the canary is still there, but it's not as reliable indicator as it once was. But the business travel is not necessarily screaming recession.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Also, well, we're talking about kind of leisure, business, bigger categories and buckets. What's going on with Gen Z? What's is Gen Z all it's cracked up to be? Do they have a lot of spending power just yet? And what are they doing in terms of these dynamics between both hotels, but also how they book hotels? I'm going to throw this one to you first, Pranavi, but it will be the same question to you as well, Sean.
Yeah, I think what we saw kind of through COVID is that travel has risen up that hierarchy of needs for a lot of people, but particularly for Gen Zs. And I think even if there is a recession, I think travel will be perhaps a little bit more protected, kind of counterintuitively, than it would be for kind of other age groups, because it's moved up in that hierarchy of needs. So even though you might not be able to afford it, you're going to try your hardest to go. And yeah, you might trade down, you might do a different kind of trip than you would. But I think it's actually very interesting that travel is protected. And kind of coming back to what I was saying earlier, I think experiential travel is really important for Gen Z. And, this trend that we've seen of experiences over things is really led by Gen Zs. So I think there's some hope that Gen Zs can kind of will still continue traveling.
The youth are our future.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say too.
As
John,
a Gen Zer, I definitely want to keep traveling.
Yeah.
What do you think, John?
Yeah, I mean, so Delta Airlines executive, recently said, they very much care about Gen Z and millennial travelers, and the idea is to try to hook them earlier as they're still very sort of willing to. The perception is that efforts at trying to cement a brand identity, you have your best option in the early stage of a customer life cycle. When people get to say that, over age 60 or something, they can sometimes be, fixed in what their perceptions are of brands. So it's an opportunity for grab. Get Your Guide, which is a tours and activities experiences supplier. They said earlier this summer that they did a survey and 70% of Gen Zs are interested in, sort of guided tours, activities, and they see an opportunity for growth. The hotel groups have been trying to build brands that are related to, that sort of hope to appeal. Marriott has the Moxie brand, for example. For Gen Zs, it has Aloft, which for many years has been targeting millennials. And so there's an interest in trying to appeal to them. And I think as this Skift travel, elsewhere in the deck, the State of Travel deck talks about banks and how Capital One and the other players are really trying to grow their programs. And Gen Z in particular loves those programs, and the travel rewards and incentives are a real driver. And so I think that you can infer from that Gen Z is really interested in, the demand is very strong.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you're jumping around the deck and drawing on other sectors as well, which is exactly our intent. And we heard something similar I think we have a quote from like EF World Journeys talking about huge demand from Gen Zs, but to this whole conversation, price sensitivity. So that reminds me of that conversation. I love that you brought up the banks and the credit cards. That ties into loyalty, that ties into so many things. And I want to keep discussing those with you guys. But first, we just need to pause for a quick word from our sponsors. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Skift Travel Podcast with Seth and Sarah. We are still joined by Pranavi and Sean. We are still discussing the state of travel for hotels and online travel agencies. And we had just mentioned right before the break the importance of credit card companies and these credit card platforms to Gen Zs. Now, this is such a huge topic. We need to dive right back into it as we come back from the break. Let's talk about them. These credit card platforms, these banks have become such huge travel players in the last few years. Capital One, Chase, American Express. I'm gonna start by throwing this to you, Sean, but I want you both to jump into this question. How are we seeing these travel loyalty credit card platforms shift in the state of hotels in 2024?
I was at a travel industry conference, the NYU Hospitality Conference, and the chief financial officer of Marriott, Leanie Oberg, was asked, like, what keeps you awake at night? And she said, the rise of these banks, these non-traditional online travel players and the financial banks. And so on the one hand, it is a plus because you now have more competition. In theory, there's more places for the hotel groups to try to get third-party distribution. So that could help add for some competition on rates. On the other side, the banks are building up their own sort of competitive loyalty networks and are sort of controlling. They're fighting to own the customer. That the Marriott Bonvoy loyalty programs and Hilton Honors programs are trying to separately get in touch with, because data is so important as a scale game. And so that I think that's that's sort of one of the drivers of interest in this space.
And Pranavi, we actually did a whole LinkedIn Live about this. I mean, I know you have a lot of thoughts on credit cards and travel.
Yeah, I think it's really a dark horse. They've really sneaked up on us. I mean, Chase, in their investor presentation last year, they said one in four leisure travel dollars is spent on Chase cards. And if you look at the kind of loyalty members, Chase has nearly 150 million loyalty members. That's nearly half of the population of the US. Compare that to Expedia. Expedia's global loyalty members is like 170, 180 million. So it's pretty close to that. And Chase, that's just in the US. So they've really kind of sneaked up on us. And, if you look at the sales, Chase is actually, the amount of travel sales that that is going through Chase is even bigger than companies like Hopper. So I think it's a company that you don't really hear about it much. But they've become, you could say, the third biggest OTA in the US after Booking and Expedia, which is really insane. And I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about B2B and why companies are powering this. Expedia is really leaning into B2B. But I think before you know it, these credit card companies will end up, owning the consumer and becoming a direct competitor to those who are powering them, Booking, Expedia. So I think they're a real threat to online distribution.
Yeah, I was talking to I was at a dinner not too long ago, and we started talking about just this thing, and there was a bunch of, I would say maybe 4 people of the Gen Z demographic sitting with us, and they all kind of immediately said, "Oh yeah, that's the only way I book travel is through their credit card." It was really kind of shocking to me just how like unified and like, oh yeah, obviously that's how we do it. So it's really telling. I think you're exactly right. But I want to talk also about licensing deals. Sean, as you well know, we've been reporting a lot of breaking news about licensing deals and loyalty partnerships, Marriott Sonder, IHG Iberostar, MGM Marriott. What are these deals, and what do they tell us about how big hotel brands are evolving and what they're really trying to do now with this?
So there are a few factors driving this, and some of it touches what's on in the state of travel report. there is a very telling chart that Pranavi and the research team put together. Is sort of like the more brands you have in your portfolio, the more you're able to drive direct bookings, and direct bookings are important because Marriott's contract with Expedia is said to be about 12% a commission rate, whereas major sort of like if you're an independent small little hotel on the corner and you try to advertise your hotel on Booking.com or Expedia, you might be paying 19%. If it's a luxury hotel, you might, and you're really desperate for customers, you might be going up as much as 30%. So trying to really cut back on those third-party distribution fees is important. And so one way to do that is you try to get as many loyalty members as you can, because loyalty members disproportionately book directly because they're really incentivized to try to get those earn and redeem their points. And so that is one of the factors that's at play. Another is I'll leave it there. So I was talking last night with both Seth and Pranavi about this sort of topic, and I know Seth has some views on it as well.
I agree. I agree with what you're saying too. Like the way I look at this space is like it's all these things are connected. It's like you've got people booking from Gen Z's booking their credit cards, and where else? Like Sarah said, obviously I would book on my credit card. Then you've got these big brands saying, well, obviously you should book through me, through Bonvoy. In order to do that, Bonvoy needs to be as big as possible and offer as much as possible. My big question, and I'm going to ask you this, Pranavi, is like, all right, so you've got the credit cards on one end, you've got these huge loyalty programs on the other end. Like, what do you do if you're Expedia? I mean, it feels like they're kind of getting a little bit left behind.
I think that's the reason we're seeing them going into B2B as well. They need a different form of distribution. They need loyalty members in a way that they aren't necessarily getting directly. And I think they're kind of stuck in the middle a little bit. And B2B allows them to access loyal members that come at a much cheaper rate than it would to try and get loyal members through other means, such as Google. I mean, if you're getting your consumers through Google, they aren't necessarily loyal. So I think B2B is the way that they're going.
Do they have any? Do you think they have any price levers they can pull?
So one thing that we're seeing, so Expedia in their recent earnings call said that they've started discounting. So they're funding discounts out of their own pocket. And this is something that Booking Holdings has been doing and has been talking about for the last couple of quarters. So Booking.com has talked about this a little bit in their latest earnings, and they're really leaning into merchandising. So bundling products, upselling, and price discounting. And they've talked about how this is going to impact take rates. They said it might impact take rates by 1% at the kind of rate they're going. That's pretty substantial. And it's a kind of pricing tactic that they haven't had to do before, which is quite interesting. I mean, you look back at 2008, 2009, it was the hotels that were giving them the cheap prices to sell on their platform. But now it's basically the inverse. The OTAs themselves are funding these discounts. So I think it's pretty telling that it's become quite a competitive landscape for the OTAs.
I think that takes us kind of full circle back to our conversation at the top where we started talking about hotel pricing power. And, if the hotels are holding the line on pricing power, then maybe the OTAs there's the lever, the positions of strength have switched such that the hotels are holding the line on pricing power and the OTAs are discounting to drive volume. It's an interesting dynamic.
I would be remiss to talk about like the state of travel and even the future of travel if I didn't ask you both about AI. I was reading something just the other day. It was so interesting. I need to go back and like finish it, but it was about a futurist prediction about the singularity, how we're getting there faster than anybody ever thought. And they were talking about nanobots and about how when the nanobots get into all of our brains, it's going to increase the human intelligence by like 1,000,000-fold, and like we're all going to live forever. And it was so interesting, but this was all by like 2040. I very much plan to still be alive by then. So I would, I want to live to see all of this. This is neither here nor there. I digress. AI and the future of travel. What does that mean for us, right? Like, so here we're all kind of just messing around with ChatGPT, a nanobot not in sight. But like in the near term, what is AI what does it really mean for this industry, both in the short term, like the near term, the next few years, and then kind of like going into the long term? You talked a little bit about it in the state of travel, and I'm curious to get your thoughts, Pranav.
Well, I think the AI piece, it ties in to all this conversation that we're having because, look, I mean, Sarah, we had the whole podcast. Go check it out if you're listening about Data and I Summit. About good AI needs good data, right?
Data, yeah,
There you
we
go.
did
It's all
talk
about
all
data.
about that, yeah.
And so I think this ties in, like, as we think about these competitive dynamics. So it's like, we just said, and now we were just talking about Pranavi, that maybe the OTAs find themselves in a bit of a weaker position. I think there's a chance this could be like the killer app to put the OTAs back in the driver's seat because they do have by far the most data. No matter how big the hotels get, they still only sell, for the most part, this is changing, but they still primarily sell hotels. The OTAs sell many different travel products, that quote unquote connected trip. Maybe the banks have some information, but I think there's a lot of security and privacy rules around banks and what they can use. And so as we think about, the future where the nanobot delivers you your favorite drink to your hotel when you check in, of course, which we're heading towards, right, Sarah? And
Yeah.
I think the platforms that have the broadest, deepest data are best positioned to win. And AI is one of those pro-incumbent technologies. I don't know if it will be quite as it's hard to build a data model. It's hard to build a language model. It's hard to build an AI model. I think it's inherently biased towards the larger, bigger scaled consolidated companies. And so I think that there's all these dynamics happening. There's this pricing pressure. There's this move towards branded and first party and direct, this move towards travel loyalty, all of which is shifting the dynamics towards big brands, towards credit cards, forcing the OTAs to discount. But maybe in the long run, there's that sort of OTA revenge can come in the form of some of these more personalized offers, better curated platforms, data-driven decision-making and travel planning. I think it's a really interesting open question, especially in the long run. I think in the short run,
OTA revenge.
Yeah, OTA revenge.
I would take the over on that. I would say maybe the AI can be an opportunity for the hotel groups to sort of like undermine the OTA advantage. Localization is one factor. So Marriott, for example, only has 4% market share outside of the US and Canada. Much of its opportunity for growth is for around the world. And one of the reasons the online travel agents have traditionally been so important for the Marriotts of the world is that they know how to, at scale, create, in Hindi, pages that describe your hotel, or to create marketing campaigns that work for specialized languages in Norway or in other countries of the world. What happened is, AI has enabled Google to add 100 languages to its Google Translate in the past 6 months. It's just able to suddenly do that very cheaply. It would enable hotel companies to sort of do a lot of that localization, both in personalized marketing and how they target, without necessarily needing to lean into the online travel agencies anymore. Now, the Marriotts and Hiltons of the world are still big players. I think you do definitely need to have some scale, but it may. I think it's a jump ball in the air, to use a basketball metaphor. I'm not entirely sure which way it might go.
Yeah. And I like the point too. I mean, the bigger point, which our CEO likes to talk about, what Rafat likes to talk about, is that like we are so close to that dream of like instant translation. And that potentially unlocks a huge new wave of travel just across the board, right? Like all of a sudden you get millions, tens of millions of new travelers who can go to a destination that they were previously intimidated by or felt closed off from them. It's a fascinating. I mean, the translation capabilities are huge, and that would be certainly a rising tide. I think one of the things that, unfortunately, is maybe a slightly bigger trend is like it gets tougher and tougher for independents. Whether you think the jump ball goes to the OTA or the jump ball goes to the Marriotts and the Hiltons of the world, hopefully we're wrong, or not hopefully, but maybe we're wrong.
The one optimistic factor from the State of Travel report, which really shocked me, was Google has doubled in the past couple of years the number of hotels that are going through its channel. I mean, what they did after the pandemic was they made posting links free, whereas they used to charge. And so that right now for hotel, Accor, which is a hotel a French-based hotel giant, they did a study through their subsidiary D-Edge of a bunch of hotels. And right now, independent hotels are, about 10% of their distribution is now coming through Google, which is more than twice what it was, previously. So it is that has come somewhat at the expense of the TripAdvisors and Kayaks and Trivagos of the world. But I think that is an opportunity for independent hotels to compete against branded, because there is this tension here. The reason I bring this up, Seth, is not sort of be pedantic, but we talk about this trend of like people wanting unique experiences. They want to have something that's Instagrammable, that makes themselves stand out and apart. Does being at a branded hotel property that is very generic, that is the same as you could be in Tokyo or in Beijing, really make the difference? So I think there is an opportunity for independent, perhaps. It may come down. It may continue to come down for some while, but it might hit some sort of point, and some of these trends may be positive. That's what I hope.
To be clear, I fully agree with you, especially in the boutique hotel movement. I mean, I think well, it's actually this conversation we're having offline about like some of these smaller subscale brands where you get all of the conformity of a big brand, but with none of the scale and network and reach of a global brand. Are really struggling, right? And want, if I'm going to go big, if I'm going to go Marriott, at least I'll go Marriott and I'll go everywhere. And if I'm going to go small, I want the Ace, the Standard, the whatever. But there is a middle ground of these, I'm not going to name specific names, but of some of these brands where it's like, where you've just got just enough properties to not have that personal touch, but not enough scale to really go anywhere.
We won't name any names. So I am curious, Sean and Pranavi, we've all read The State of Travel. Given like the changing consumer behaviors, I just kind of, and Seth, you too, because you were a big contributor to this. What was the biggest surprise? What surprised you the most when putting together The State of Travel? What did you find, or what did you read? What did you see that you're just like, I didn't expect that?
I guess, yeah, I'll kick it off. I think just generally, for State of Travel, but generally, I think I'm kind of surprised by how much consumers have taken control, that they've really become a much more important stakeholder in the travel industry in a way that that wasn't the case kind of pre-COVID. And I think because travel in itself has become more important for consumers, that stake is higher for people selling travel to consumers itself. To consumers as well. So I think the game has just been raised quite a fair bit versus pre-COVID for those selling travel to consumers.
Yeah, I love what Pranavi said. I wouldn't add too much more onto it. I think I'm continuously surprised by, how strong the demand seems to be. It's not the topic of this conversation, but I got to do the cruise section and to listen to the cruise line speak. There is no stopping it. And granted, not everyone agrees, but I think that Pranavi's spot on. Like, the consumers are in control. They're very sophisticated. They want to travel, and they're going to hold you to high expectations. And it's increasingly difficult to hide behind these kind of jargony, industry, pass the buck excuses. I think that's a great one.
For me, there was a slide about tourism activities and experiences sector, and it talks about the revenue growth. And if you adjust it for inflation, spending on experiences is just travel experiences is just about the same as what it was in 2019. And I would have expected at this point it would be significantly higher. And I think there's a sort of a story within a story of that. I think the Get Your Guides of the world have taken a lot of share, whether it's away from some of their competitors, or whether it's from the walk-up business or the local kiosk in the center of a European town. But I feel like the travel experiences story has had it's complicated. I'm very interested, but I know at Skift Global Forum there's going to be a presentation that Skift Research and McKinsey is going to do about experiences. So I'm eager to sort of find out about the trend. But that was what I was most surprised by.
I'm curious. I'm curious to hear from all of you, just to go on experiences. Have any of you ever booked in your personal travel experiences, like a organized experience kind of adventure or trip? I have not, and I don't know anybody who's ever done so either. And so, like, this is back to your point, Sean. We hear about it all the time, and we continue to hear about it all the time. I don't really know anybody who's ever done it, and I haven't ever done it. So I'm curious, have you guys?
I feel like I'm not an anomaly because I was always sort of like an internet, early adopter or something. So like a week ago, I was in Seattle. I booked online ahead of time a little tour of the cruise ship through the locks with some friends, or if you in terms of like a hiking trip in Peru through an Intrepid Travel tours group. So depending on how you define online walking tours, when I go booking online for a walking tour in a city or something, or like a museum, or I definitely have done that, but I agree that when I talk with all of my friends, Sarah, I completely agree with you. I'm just struck by how I never hear it.
Yeah,
I guess I do book online, but it's always in destination. Maybe that's because I'm a bad planner, but it'll always be, I'll be in destination and I'll see an advert for something. It might even be from a Get Your Guide or a Viator. For example, in London, this is a bit of an irony, but I see the open top bus tours and they have a Get Your Guide advert kind of across the bus, which is kind of, ironic. Would you book directly on the open top bus tour or on Get Your Guide? So it's like coming back full circle. But I always book in destination. I think that's a really key difference about the experiences sector compared to hotels or flights or private rentals. You're always going to book those in advance, but experiences is just so fragmented, and I think that's a inherent differentiator between the two sectors.
All right. Well, I don't know what this says about me, but I do, and I have booked these experiences online in advance. So I did a trip to it's in Bangkok with my family. I went on Viator. I looked for a bike tour, and I found one, and it was actually a very great experience. I think the booking experience took a lot of curation, and when we were in India for the Skift India Summit, I used with locals. And I did book that in destination, though. But that was a great example where I was short on time. It was a business trip. I didn't have a lot of leisure time. I was in a brand new country where I loved India, but I don't think it's insulting to say it's a little chaotic. I think that's part of the Delhi experience. And I wanted a guide, and I want a local guide. So with locals was in the name. So I have booked these sort of experiences before. I think it's grown. I think it's the curation is the key.
Yeah, I'm with Pranavi. I always do it when I'm there. Like usually for me, I'm a big beach goer. And so it's usually just going to the local dive shop and being like, when is your next trip out? And we'll get on that. But I don't do it ahead of time. I like to walk around and kind of.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, not hopefully, but these we'll see. These platforms are trying to create anxiety. And that's what we've seen in the hotel world and the airline world, is that people get anxious. They're going to miss their flight or miss their room, or the prices are going to change. And for now, the dive shop's, fun, chill guy, but maybe.
Well, I think it depends what the experience is. And we're actually seeing that. So if you want to go to the Colosseum, tickets for that will sell out weeks, months in advance. So you might actually plan a trip to Rome based on when you can get tickets to the Colosseum. So we're actually seeing that, experiential led travel, it's really, really dominating where you travel and why you travel. But it really depends on what kind of experience it is. But I think it's fascinating that you would book a trip to Rome purely because there's one single slot available for that ticket, and you're going to book a whole trip around that.
Well, and then there's the viral TikTok element to it too, where I've seen a couple of videos now of like this great cat cafe in Japan. You need to go to the pig cafe or whatever. Book it now, and then they only have so many slots a day. And someone's like, my trip to Japan is not complete unless I've had a coffee with a pig. And then they got to book it, and they got to be there. And that's I don't know, experiential. I suppose that is experiential travel as well.
I was just in Mexico, and the one thing that was interesting to me is we went swimming in a cenote, which is amazing, but they charge a different price for Instagrammers and influencers and photographers. I wish I would have taken a picture of it, but it's like written, in hand up, there's one price for locals, one price for nationals, one price for visitors, and one price for influencers and Instagrammers.
Is it cheaper or more expensive?
Oh, more expensive. Yeah, more expensive. This is capitalism at its finest, right?
So surge pricing for influencers, I think that's something we can all get behind. I think that's been a great conversation. Pranavi, Sean, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today. And dear listener, if you enjoyed this podcast as well, State of Travel, it is a free report. Go out there and download it now. If you're a research subscriber, even if you're not a research subscriber, this is a report that you can access. We really encourage you to go and check it out. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. And again, if you did like it, like, subscribe, share. We were just talking about being influencers. It works for a reason. Make sure you give it that thumbs up and that 5 stars. And if you have questions you want us to answer on the podcast, that email address is podcast@skift.com. I think that's all the housekeeping we have for today. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you next time on the Skift Travel Podcast with Seth and Sarah.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Skift Travel Podcast. Wherever you're listening, please make sure to subscribe. If you like what you're hearing, rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review. It really helps get the word out about us, our podcast, and make sure that we can still continue to bring it to you free of charge every week.
If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell as well. That way you'll know every time we have a new episode.